Welcome to the clinic.
Emergency.
Germany, Germany. Not in Germany, Macron, Tamani, when mother Fanani, call 911, emergency, go to Germany, Germany, not in Germany, Macron, Tamani, when mother Fanani,
What's up, family?
you can compare Fanani.
It's yet another beautiful Saturday afternoon, and this is the diary of a young black king. It is 35 minutes past 12 p.m.
Kikula paniga na dip and the ladies be biting lips really wanataka yo mchezo wa speed bro kama niko nishuhudie for pop and cut kwa street na karibika budget na fix aka choose exclusive shit we got some exclusive hits that
From Germany. And this is Brooklyn Boys on their new album called B-Boy Settings with Germany. I decided to start the show today with some music. I hardly ever do this. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting conversation. We're going to be having a very interesting conversation on the scams of the century. Emergency. And of course you can tell me where you are listening from. Unanipata ukiwa wapi? If you're listening from Kenya, if you're watching, listening, of course we are both on the network and on YouTube, Facebook, and yeah, on two YouTube pages and on Facebook. I hope you're having yourself an amazing weekend. I'm having myself an amazing weekend here in Nairobi. It's a bit chilly, but it's an amazing day. Emergency.
Germany, Germany, not in Germany, Macron, Tamani, when we're at Fanani, when if I let them look alike, I tell them go to a right, show up boy to a side, strong and good, but the tight, the best of them will classify, but they look clarify. We are back, I don't get to let tell my slowly to not canopy. The best broke, I'm not fixed here. At this level, at the first that we get free. When I head look a hill, pussy. When the bitch, looking in chase a jam, a ball,
Emergency.
Germany, not in Germany.
Yes, and we are going to be deconstructing some of the biggest lies and propagandas of the 21st century. And you know there are so many of them. There are so many lies and propaganda that have been fed to the people, and especially to the people of Africa, because I'm more concerned about the African people, black people to be specific. They're going to be looking at some of the scams and lies and propagandas after this song by Brooklyn Boys. It's called Germany.
Emergency. Germany, Germany, not in Germany, Macron, Tamani, when we're at Fanani.
I was talking about how I sometimes forget I work in a radio station because it's been so long since I started my show, any of my show, with a song or anything, with some music. It's always me ranting. Immediately the show starts and I start ranting immediately. So that's why I decided to start the show today with some music. And of course, welcome to the Diary of a Young Black King. I hope you're having yourself an amazing day. And it is an amazing day for me, the 9th of March 2024. As I said, it is a cold day. It's quite chilly in Nairobi, chilly. But we have been having heat waves in Nairobi, so it's a little bit cooler in comparison to the typical Nairobi weather, especially for the last couple of months. And we're going to be talking about the scams of the century, and we're going to be deconstructing the lies and propagandas that have been getting fed to the people. And there are quite a lot of them. Quite a lot. I don't even think 2 hours will be enough for us to finish talking about the scams of the century. And we're gonna start with the biggest one of them all. And I want you to tell me, what do you think is the scam of the century? That one lie that has been fed to the people so much that it now looks like a truth. Because the truth has been a lie is repeated so much to a point that it becomes a truth. And I I I I was watching Game of Thrones, and I don't remember the specific character, but there was one character who said, when lies are spoken too much, then truths don't mean anything anymore. I don't remember who said that. If you watched Game of Thrones, you can remind me who said those words, who said those sayings. Yeah, there was a character who said, when lies become the order of the day, when lies are spoken too much, then truth no longer has a meaning. And I think that is where the society is at right now. Lies have been spoken too much to a point that even somebody saying the truth is treated with doubts. I will not believe you if you tell me anything right now. For example, you might, if a legit disease, a pandemic, let's say a legit pandemic broke out in Kenya or in Uganda or in Zambia, a legit pandemic, and now they say there's this legit pandemic that has broken up and we need to take vaccines for it. I'm not gonna believe them, even though it might be true. It might be true there's a pandemic that has broken out, but lies have been spoken so much that words no longer have any meaning anymore. And I used to have a lecturer, his name was Mushiri Mukunga, who used to say the problem with the contemporary world, with the modern world, is nobody means what they say and nobody says what they mean. So words no longer have meaning, and that is why you've been fed with so many scams, so many lies, so much propaganda. And let us start with climate change. That is perhaps the biggest of the biggest of the biggest of the scams of the 21st century. And when I start speaking of climate change, I don't even know where to start, because it's a very wide lie, a very, very wide lie. You know, starting with, I can't start with carbon footprint. I can't go to, right now they are even having there is even a whole new market called carbon credits. But let us start with carbon footprint. And I'm going to tell you where the origin of the word carbon footprint came from, and why you are hearing all the narrative right now. The word of the day is carbon footprint. Regulate your carbon footprint. You need to take care of your carbon footprint. You need to minimize your carbon footprint. And you wonder, what really is this carbon footprint, and how am I related? How is it related to me? So apparently, let me start with the biggest source of propaganda being Google, and I'm gonna Google the meaning of carbon footprint. So apparently, Google tells me a carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, produced directly or indirectly by human activities, usually expressed in equivalent tons of carbon dioxide emitted. It measures the impact of human activities on the environment in terms of their contribution to climate change. So a carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gases that you, particularly watching me, emit. So a carbon footprint is your contribution to climate change. It's how much you're contributing towards allegedly the forest fires that we are seeing, the global warming that we are seeing. So it is how much you're contributing towards that. That is according to the biggest source of propaganda, Google. Shout out to them. So that is a carbon footprint. But where really did the word carbon footprint come from, and where is this whole talk of carbon footprint coming from? And why is it the word of the day nowadays? If if you start talking about climate change, reducing your carbon footprint, then people are gonna start listening to you. So where does this come from? So apparently, there is this British mining company. It's called BP. It's called BP. So BP is a British petroleum company. It used to be called British Petroleum Company (PLC). So that is the origin of the word BP. I know you've heard of BP probably somewhere. So it is a British multinational oil and gas company headquartered in London, England. It is one of the oil and gas super majors and one of the largest companies measured by revenue and profits. So believe it or not, the biggest gas and oil company in the world sat down and decided we are polluting, we are emitting too much carbon, and we need to regulate that. We need to go green. I want you to get the irony in this. BP, British Petroleum Company, is the biggest multinational gas company, among the world's largest gas producers in the world. By gas, I mean petroleum, gas and petroleum. So gas is like the term for, especially in Africa and in Kenya, we hardly use the word gas. We either say petrol or diesel. If you go to a petrol station and you say gas, then the attendant will think you want to have gas in your tires. So that's why I'm explaining gas. So BP is one of the biggest, if not the largest companies in the world in terms of revenue, in terms of profit. It was actually the biggest emitter in 2018. It contributed to about 1.5% of total carbon emission in the world. One company. And so apparently BP sat down and decided we need to go green. I want you to get the irony in this once again. The biggest gas producer in the world sat down and decided it's time we go green. We no longer need gas, is harmful to us, and we should have more electric cars, and we should reduce emission. Something that was bound to directly impact their revenue making, their profit making, because of course, as you know, they get their profits and revenues from selling gas, which is allegedly, I'll use the word allegedly, harmful to the environment. And I'm going to explain why carbon is not even harmful to the environment, because everything in the world is made up, everything you see is made up of carbon. You yourself are made up of carbon. Carbon is a constituent matter of almost everything that we have in the world, but apparently now we are made to believe that carbon is very, very harmful, and we should never emit carbon, and it is going to end, the world is going to end if we start emitting carbon. But anyway, I was talking about BP. So BP sat down and decided, I know I'm the biggest polluter in the world, but we need to stop pollution. And they launched this, they even launched a site. It's called BP. They have a site where you can even calculate your carbon footprint. You can calculate how much carbon you emitted. And they're going to tell you how much money you need to pay. So you have to pay a certain amount for the amount of carbon you. And so you ask yourself, how can the world biggest gas producer, how is the world biggest gas producer concerned about pollution? And yet they get their revenue and profits from the same. How it makes sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me. You can tell me if it makes sense to you. How the world biggest gas producer, I don't know, it produces how many million, it extracts how many, it mines how many millions of tons of, so it produces around 3.7 million barrels per day of oil. But apparently it is the one that is more concerned about climate change than the whole of the other corporations in the world. And so I'll tell you why BP, because BP is the one that popularized the term carbon footprint. If you've been hearing the term carbon footprint, and right now everybody's talking about carbon footprint, how we need to offset, they use the word offset, how we need to offset our carbon footprint. And this comes even to countries like Uganda. What do you mean a carbon footprint in Uganda? A carbon footprint in Ghana, if it is there, if at all there is a carbon footprint there, it is negligible. It is in negligible quantities. These are countries that depend on agriculture. They depend on, how much CO2 is being emitted in agriculture. Most of the countries in Africa are not even that industrialized for them to produce enough CO2 to be noticed, as they produce negligible amount of CO2. How many people in Uganda have cars? How many people in Kenya have cars? For us to start having climate change conversations in Africa. Anyway, so BP popularized the word carbon footprint, and rightly so, because of this. They wanted to shift the blame from them to you. They wanted to make it your responsibility. They do the pollution, but they're gonna make it look like you have a responsibility to make sure that the climate, there is no global warming. And yet, as I told you, in 2018, it was the largest emitter. BP was the largest emitter of carbon in the world, contributed about 1.5% of the world's total emission. That is one company, just one, a single company contributed about 1.5% of the world's total emission. If whatever they use to measure is accurate, I don't know. Whatever measures they use, I really don't care. But they said, I saw a report that said it contributed 1.5% of the world's total emission. But now they want to make it look like it's your business as a resident in Senegal to make sure there's no global warming. They even had a calculator. I think I should do that test right now because it's there online. Let me look for that BP calculator. They have a calculator that you can use to calculate how much carbon footprint you have, what is your carbon footprint, and how much money you need to pay. So you have to pay according to the amount of carbon footprint you produce. So let me see how much I owe BP. I might pay them if I'm in a good mood. I don't want BP coming for me with the so let's see how much I owe them. I'm gonna do the test online with the calculator. They even have a calculator to calculate your carbon. So here is the calculator. Let us do the test together and see how much carbon footprint I emitted in Kenya and how much I owe BP. BP being the British Petroleum Corporation, the biggest gas producer in the world. So the first question is, what do you want to add next? Road travel or air travel? I've only traveled by air once in my life, so it's definitely road. A car, motorcycle, a van. Let me pick a car. Select your fuel type. It has to be petrol. That is what majority of vehicles in Kenya and Africa use. Enter your annual distance traveled. We use kilometers. Nobody uses miles. I never understood the miles, but I don't want to go into miles and tons and so my annual travel distance has to be about an approximation. I hardly travel out of the city unless really necessary. So might be 4,000 kilometers a year. The highest it can be is 4,000 kilometers a year because I hardly travel out of Nairobi, maybe once or twice a month, and it is rare. So let me see how much carbon I emitted according to BP target neutral. Wow. I'm offsetting 2.55 tons of carbon. So I apparently owe BP $25. That is the amount of carbon that I emitted for the last 1 year. It was 2.55 tons of carbon. And I can check out now and pay the $25 of the carbon footprint that I emitted. My carbon footprint was the one that is on the screen right now. I don't know what was yours. So for those watching or listening, I know yours has to be higher because I hardly travel and I owe them $25. $25 for what? But anyways, so I was telling you why BP came up with the word carbon footprint and why they really popularized it so much with campaigns, with it being talked on the media, and every politician was now talking about we need to, and in every climate conference, the talk was about carbon footprint. We need to reduce our carbon footprint this, carbon footprint that. I mean, they fly to the conferences in private jets that emit I don't know how many times more than my annual emission, but they are going there to talk about climate change. But let us not judge them harshly. So apparently, that is they really popularized the term carbon footprint, and it was the word of the day. That is a term being used, and now apparently everything is eco-friendly. For you to sell a product right now, you have to add the word green or eco-friendly. That is the new marketing term in town. If you have a product, doesn't matter what you are selling, doesn't matter whatever you are selling, just add the word green, eco-friendly. It is gonna sell. I'm even thinking of branding my program eco-friendly. Maybe I'm gonna get more viewers. So apparently my program is eco-friendly and green. Uses renewable energy. I use renewable energy to broadcast this. So that is the new marketing term right now. Doesn't matter the mechanics behind, just say it is eco-friendly. And everybody is gonna support you. So they popularized the word carbon footprint because they wanted to take the blame, to shift the blame from them to you, to make it look like it was your problem, it was your fault, to make it look like you are the one responsible. You're the one responsible for the melting of the glaciers, I don't know where. You're the one responsible for the forest fires in Canada. You're the one responsible for the global warming. You're the one responsible for... And people bought it, and now people are trying to cycle. People are buying Teslas because they bought the lie. And that, for me, tops the scams of the century. The fact that they were able to convince people to buy into the lie, into the propaganda, that it is your fault that you are having all this climate change talk. And personally, I think the climate change conversation is more financially driven than philanthropy driven, if there's philanthropy in it at all, if there's any good cause in it at all. It is more financially driven. Because why is the world biggest producer of oil asking me to pay $25 for traveling 4,000 kilometers a year? You emitted you emitted 1.5% of the total carbon emission in the world. How much did you pay? If I'm paying $25, I expect you to be paying in millions. I mean, I don't even have a car, but I'm supposed to pay $25. Don't even drive, man, but I'm supposed to pay $25. What about you? You who... And the term carbon has been demonized so much with the talks of carbon, everything carbon, and carbon is one of the constituents that make up everything we see. Even you yourself, there is carbon in you. But anyway, that was not the conversation of the day. I was talking about the scams of the century and deconstructing the biggest lies and propaganda of the 21st century. And you can tell me what is that one big scam that you believe in, that before we go to the next scam, what is that one scam of the century that you know? As I pay the $25 to BP for polluting, for apparently for traveling 4,000 kilometers a year. That was 4,000 miles. No, that was I owe them a lot of money. They have even sent me something like, looks like an invoice. And so they did and successfully they successfully did it, and now it looks like it is your fault. And that is why there's this whole conversation of going green, ride a bicycle to work. But let us be realistic. Let us be realistic for a minute. Doesn't matter how many times you ride on a bicycle to work. Doesn't matter how many times you switch off your lights when going to sleep. Doesn't matter how many times you jog to work. Doesn't matter how many times. At the end of the day, your carbon emission is negligible as compared to these big corporations. But they're making it look like it is your fault, it is your responsibility to offset, to. And people bought the lies, and that is why right now, majority of the people are running towards electric cars, which is another big scam that is leading to the death of hundreds of kids in DRC. And of course, it is also a scam because in Africa, most of it has to be charged using electricity, but most of the electricity in Africa is hydro generated. It is generated using water. It is hydro generated. And one thing about hydro generated electricity it uses diesel somewhere along its path, especially to rotate the generators. And so you avoid the diesel to charge using electricity that used diesel in its generation. But shout out to you, you are doing amazing, you are saving the climate. Saving the climate from what? Saving the climate from who? And I'm not a big supporter of Trump, but I saw a video of him talking about there is not enough evidence to show that some of the things that they say they blame on climate change are as a result of climate change. An example being the melting of the glaciers. There is no enough evidence to indicate that the glaciers are melting because of climate change. There isn't enough evidence to show that. There is not enough scientific evidence to show that were it not for climate change, these things would not have happened. So I sometimes think that climate change is the new scapegoat for everything. There'll be a drought that would have occurred whether or not there was climate change. Weather patterns sometimes vary, weather is not supposed to be. Weather patterns vary. It used to vary even before there was climate change. I remember even in the 1700s in Kenya, there used to be droughts. There are people whose names, African names are always have a meaning. So whatever your African name is, it has a meaning to it. You are named after an incident or something. So there are people who are named after droughts, and that was in 17s and 18s. And I don't know if there was still carbon emission back then, but there were droughts even back then. Weather patterns change, weather patterns vary. But right now, if there is a drought somewhere, it is climate change, and it is the whole talk of it's the carbon emissions. You're emitting too much carbon. That's why there's drought in what country is experiencing drought? Tigray in Ethiopia. So apparently there's drought in Tigray, Ethiopia because of climate change. But look at history. You're gonna find out that somewhere there was drought somewhere in some time span in Ethiopia. It is not the first time there is drought in Ethiopia. It really is not the first time. It's not the first time we are seeing drought. There is not enough evidence to conclude that. There's not enough evidence to conclude that climate change is the one to blame for some of the things that it is blamed for. So is it used as a scapegoat? Very many times. A country will fail to put measures in place for food security. For example, Nigeria is going through drought right now. Not drought, but hunger because of the tough economic times. So a country will fail to put measures in place for food security. It will fail to, when the harvests are plenty, it will fail to buy and store grains. And then when the food is not there, years later, they're going to blame climate change. But come on, the harvest was plenty a few years ago to a point that you exported grains. Where was climate change back then? And so it's the new scapegoat, the same way the Russia-Ukrainian war is a scapegoat for all African leaders. Any African leader going through any economic time they'll increase the price of everything and blame it on Ukraine. They're going to increase the price of power and say, it is the Ukrainian war, there is a war in Ukraine, and you wonder, our power comes from Uganda. How is it related to whatever is happening in Ukraine? How is Owen Falls in Uganda related to the war in Ukraine? And that is the new scapegoat in terms finances. Politicians will steal and steal and steal all the money, and after they're done stealing, they are going to blame Putin. It's Putin's fault. That is why we don't have money in our reserves. So climate change and Russia-Ukrainian war are the most common scapegoats that we are seeing in this century. And Israel and Palestine is going to be another scapegoat soon. Before that, it was the COVID. So they were talking about we were in recession. COVID, COVID did this. COVID did that. COVID destroyed our economy. COVID destroyed the jobs. I know it did, but not to the extent that you make it look like it did. It was bad. COVID was bad. It was terrible for the economy, but it was the one that was being used as a scapegoat before the Russia-Ukrainian war. Now that is the new scapegoat, together with climate change, and it has led to a whole new market, the carbon credits market. So the carbon credit market is a market that trades, for lack of a better word, trades the permission to pollute. That is why they're asking me to pay $25 for the pollution that I polluted in the last 1 year. So I'm paying for the permission to pollute. This $25.52 is the easiest way to talk about carbon credits. And it is the reason you are seeing every African leader right now is in the climate change bandwagon. It is the new talk in town. It's the new cool thing. The new cool thing is you talking about climate change. The new cool thing is you talking about how carbon emission and the carbon credit in Africa is affecting this, affecting that. So the carbon credit market is buying the ability to pollute. And we saw an auction in Kenya where Arab countries came and bought the permission to pollute from Kenyan corporations. So apparently, according to them, they said carbon credit is where you finance, because you're polluting, you now finance a company that is doing away with the pollution that you made. In short, you pollute, then you pay someone else to offset. They use the word offset, which is doesn't make sense to me, but so they use the word offset. So I pollute, then I pay you to offset it. I know the whole narrative doesn't make sense. It is not even supposed to, but that is carbon credits in a nutshell. So I'll do the pollution, then you'll do my dirty laundry. I'll be the one. I, as a big corporation in the West, will pollute as much as I want. Then I'll take a few dollars, send it to Uganda, and have those people in Uganda, wash my dirty linen. And now I'll feel good about myself. I'm contributing towards climate, towards greener energy, and a lot of other. And so there was an auction in Kenya. The biggest carbon auction in the world happened in Kenya, where Arab corporations bought carbon credits worth millions. And let me see if I can see a video of the market that happened, so I can share it with you, so that you can understand why I keep saying that this is one of the biggest scams of the 21st century.
To my explainer tonight, as Kenya hosts the inaugural Climate Change Summit, there has been much talk about carbon credits and their sale. What are they? Who has them? How and where are they traded? And how do they contribute to reducing the effects of climate change? Well, before we begin, some context is important, right? So it has been agreed that greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide warm up the atmosphere and, of course, lead to the damaging effects of the atmosphere and the earth, and they limit the earth's ability to cool itself. And this is what leads to the damaging effects on climate that we have witnessed. Ice caps melting, floods, drought, and other effects, which is why at the Paris Climate Summit in 2015, 190 nations signed up to the Paris Agreement and committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and limiting the global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, this historic agreement was actually preceded, in fact, by the Kyoto Protocol of 1997, where it was also decided that a carbon credit proposal was mooted to reduce carbon emissions. Now, later in Marrakesh in Morocco, they spelled out how the system would work. So now that we have that background, just what are carbon credits? Well, if you take a look at it in some rather simple terms, carbon credits are simply buying permission to pollute. See, if you are a company whose business and production processes are necessarily polluting because of the nature of your business, then you find a place or another country or another company that is doing work to clean the environment. So let's say you cannot avoid polluting where you are. So you pay somebody else, someplace else, who is doing work to reverse the effects of your own actions that are damaging the environment. So you are emitting carbon dioxide into the environment, which we have agreed is all warming up the earth and causing the negative effects we have all witnessed and experienced. But to offset your actions, you are paying someone who is working on removing or absorbing that carbon dioxide from the air. That person could be doing that through planting trees, which, if you remember our science classes back in primary school, trees absorb carbon dioxide from the air for their own photosynthesis. Or perhaps they could be investing in renewable energy like we're doing here in Kenya. So the next question is, so how much do carbon credits cost? Each permit or carbon credit is equivalent to 1 ton of carbon dioxide that is emitted into the environment. Each company, depending on their size and nature of business, has its determined emissions into the atmosphere is assigned a number of permits. They can trade these, and also if they do not emit as much carbon dioxide as had been initially estimated, they can sell those permits to others. Now, the World Bank estimates that each ton of carbon dioxide should cost between $40 and $80. This is based on the Paris Climate Agreement. But most of the time, the price is far lower than this. And we shall talk about why the trading system and the pricing is considered particularly problematic by many countries, including Kenya, in a moment. But first, how does the trade of carbon credits actually work? Well, first, it's important to note that carbon credits are an intangible commodity. The carbon credit system is not as regulated as other markets, and they're traded in what is known as a voluntary market. Secondly, companies don't deal with each other directly. There are companies in between, brokers or middlemen, if you like. One way of understanding this is how we deal with maize in this country, right? The farmer has the commodity, which is maize, and there is a buyer at the other end of the chain, that's at the market. Now we have brokers who get the commodity from the one who owns it. They incur their transportation and storage costs, and then they get that commodity to the buyer who's at the other end. Now the cost of the broker that the broker bought the maize from, at the farmer, is not the same cost he will sell it to the one at the market. Similarly, the carbon credit trade system is aligned. It is the companies trading in them that get to decide what the price of the carbon credits will be in an unregulated voluntary market system. And this is what we've been saying is problematic. Many are raising issues with this. This is because the market forces are still skewed to those on the other side of the world. They're the ones who are recognized, certified, and it's according to their standards, not ours. In fact, one rallying call from President Ruto on this has been to find a better way to decide the price. This is his argument. He says, we in this part of the world who are engaging in climate-friendly practices, from growing trees to using renewable energy, are the ones with something to sell. And yet, we're not the ones deciding the price. So his argument has been that we should have a say in the cost of the carbon credits. Now, Kenya does, in fact, have a lot to offer in this trade. Though we're one of the smallest polluters in the world, contributing to less than 1% of the world's emissions, we have also done quite some work in offsetting the effects of the work of others. And that is why
so that was the auction that I was talking about, where Saudi companies bought 2.2 million tons of carbon credit in one of the biggest carbon credit auction. So they bought 2.2 million tons, and you saw 1 ton, the amount of money that 1 ton costs. Now, even conservation, which was African, which used to be our thing, we used to love the environment, and that is why, if you look at most of Africa, there are so many forests, so many wild animals, so there's so much fauna, there's so much greenery in Africa. So it used to be something that we did because we knew it was a noble cause, it was a noble thing to do. But right now, everything is done from what I would say financial perspective. And so even the people planting trees, even the people talking about greener energies, even the people pretending to care about our environment, they are all after financial gain. They're trying to sell the carbon credits to the white man and the Saudis. And the Saudis and the big corporations are polluting recklessly because they know they are going to go to Africa and they're going to have someone clean up their mess. So it's a whole new market, a carbon credit market. So that is why I said, if anybody comes to you talking about climate change, talking about how there's global warming and how much we need to do this, to do that, to save the planet, they're just looking for money, man. Nobody really cares like that. Save the planet from who? What do you mean save the planet? They're just looking for money. It's part of the hustle. So I never believe any corporation, any organization out there claiming to work towards climate change activism. It's all profit motivated. That is why they sold 2.2 million tons of carbon credits here in Kenya to the Saudis last year.
June this year, a group of 16 companies from Saudi Arabia bought more than 2.2 million tons of carbon credits in a Kenyan auction that was billed as the world's largest sale of its kind. Now, like we've said, it's not a perfect system, right? There are questions about who is setting the price and the standards. That those in the other part of the world who are causing the pollution are the ones setting these standards, while the ones who are offsetting the actions and the owners of the carbon credits are not getting their fair share. Bottom line of this carbon credit approach is this. It is a recognition that most human beings are motivated when there is money involved. Lessons that have been learned from years of trying to tackle this is that forcing people to do things and make commitments to reduce the effects of climate change is not as easy. In fact, attempts to compel governments to commit to these things has proven difficult, and this is because all countries are sovereign. You cannot impose everything on them. They have their own domestic policies. They have their own domestic priorities. And so it was thought that if you do two things, one, involve the private sector, and two, inject some money into it, then you might move the needle a little bit on the commitments that have been made to tackling climate change, and in particular, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's why it was decided to put in place what are called market mechanisms that would incentivize people and companies to save the environment in ways as they make some profit. Now, this concept, like we said, is problematic for some climate activists, even as they argue that it is a measurable approach. The challenges that have been raised is this one of being voluntary and therefore not binding Two, the fact that one continues to pollute simply because they can offset their actions elsewhere also remains a problem. Activists say that the agreement should go beyond paying somebody else to solve the problems that you are causing, but that you should also be bound to change your own processes and make them green and beneficial to the environment. Of course, thirdly, like we said, is who regulates the carbon credit trade? Who decides the terms of the sale or the trade? Who decides the price of the carbon credit? And that is why there is proposed legislation in this country. Kenya is seeking to regulate the carbon credit trade. Now, the bill is known as the Carbon Credit Trading and Benefit Sharing Bill 2023. It seeks to do a number of things: establish a regulatory framework for the trading of carbon credits and benefit sharing of the same. It also hopes to establish a carbon credit trading benefit authority and to register and regulate carbon trading businesses, and also set up a tribunal that would mediate disputes in the market. It finally hopes to introduce clarity on some of the issues and put Kenya on the world map as a market leader in the carbon space and establish the growth of carbon projects in the country and beyond.
So if that doesn't sound like financial motivation to you, then I don't know what financial motivation to you is. It is majorly people are financially motivated. They are leaders who pretend that they are caring about the climate change, but nobody is really. I told you, if anybody comes to you, tells you they are concerned about climate change, I don't know, save the planet, tell them to get the fuck off. Nobody is really interested in climate change. They're just after the dollars, the money that is there in the carbon credit market, and it is buying the pollution, the permission to pollute. So I can pollute as much as I want, I can emit as much carbon as I want, I can do as I want, but I'm going to just send a few dollars to Kenya, to Uganda, to Senegal, and they're going to do the dirty laundry for me. And that is climate change for you. The biggest scam of the century. The biggest scam of the century. And you're going to come to electric cars in a bit. But we've been talking about carbon credits. And I remember telling you, even the word carbon has been demonized. But in reality, carbon is one of the major constituents. It is one of the components that make up life on Earth. I mean, you take carbon out, and the world that it is does not exist. Carbon is a fundamental element. It is found in almost each and every substance you see. Carbon is found in organic compounds. Carbon forms the backbone of organic molecules, including lipids, nucleic acids such as DNA and RNA, and many other complex forms of essential life. So, first and foremost, carbon is not as demonic as you think it is. With the whole talk of carbon, emitting carbon, you're made up of carbon yourself. Your ribonucleic acid, that is the RNA, your deoxyribonucleic acid, that is the DNA, your lipids that are used to transport nutrients and everything in your body, your nucleic acids, that is the ones that I've mentioned, the DNA and the RNA, which without the DNA, you are not there. The DNA is the it is what makes you up, and it is made up, it has carbon in it. It is an essential molecule for life, has carbon in it. The same carbon that we have demonized. If you mention carbon, people will think of fires, forest fires. They'll think of glaciers melting. They'll think of droughts in Africa. They'll think of, fossil fuels are all made up of carbon. Coal, oil, natural gas. And one thing about this is, allegedly, I've never known the truth in this, and I really hope someone will explain to me fossil fuels, and because from the little knowledge that I was taught, which I don't know if it is the truth or propaganda, fossil fuels are from remains of plants and animals. I don't know. I wish Keith was here to help me understand fossil fuels and how fossil fuels are dangerous to the environment, because I thought fossil fuels were remains of plants and animals, and when the plants and animals die and now the carbon in them gets disintegrated, that is where fossil fuel come from. I don't know. I don't have enough information on fossil fuels. All I have is the propaganda that was fed to me in school and about fossil fuel. If anybody understands fossil fuels, better than me, you can tell me on the comments. I'll really appreciate. But I know carbon is also a major, it is made, all carbonates, carbonate minerals such as limestone, marble, they are all made up of carbon, the same carbon we demonize. Biomass is also made up of carbon. That is, when I talk of biomass, I'm talking about woods, I'm talking about crops. You take out carbon, there are no crops. You take out carbon, carbon is a major, carbon is used even for you to be able to live. You need nutrients, you need food. Carbon is used in photosynthesis, isn't it? So is carbon really as bad as you think it is? And as we come to the end of the climate change narrative, and not really the end because we'll talk about electric cars for a bit, I started by telling you the word carbon footprint was invented. The term carbon footprint was invented by the biggest oil, not really invented, but popularized by the biggest oil mining company in the world. It is called BP, British Petroleum Corporation. I don't know who owns British Petroleum Corporation, but it is the one that popularized the term. You know, there was campaigns all over talking about reduce your carbon footprint, offset. No, they use the word offset. Offset your carbon footprint. You making the world, look at you, you're making the world warmer. You're the one responsible for this, you're the one responsible for that. You're the one responsible for the fire accidents. You're the one responsible for the environmental degradation. You're the one responsible for melting of glaciers. But in reality, all they wanted to do was to take the blame was to shift the blame to you, to make it your responsibility as a consumer. As a consumer of products they make. So I make a product, I give it to you, then I blame you for it. So BP mines, produces about 3.7 million barrels of gas, of oil per day. 3.7 million barrels per day. I give it to you, then I blame you. I tell you make better choices. So I give you gas and then tell you need to make better choices, bruv. There's no way you shouldn't be buying oil that I produced, by the way. So I tell you shouldn't be using diesel in your car. And I sold the diesel to you. But now I make it look like your problem. And now you have to be the one to offset the carbon. You have to be the one to ride a bicycle to work. You have to be the one to jog to work. You have to be the one to buy a Tesla. You have to be the one to feel the guilt. Yet, I'm the biggest emitter. So that was the main purpose of the word carbon footprint, which was executed well and which worked to perfection. Worked to perfection. That is why right now the talk in town is climate change. And now let us go to electric cars that use cobalt that is mined in DRC. That makes me really mad talking about DRC. So electric cars, are they really the future? And you can't talk about electric cars without talking about carbon, because apparently electric cars were brought in to deal with carbon emissions, because they say electric cars do not emit. But the first thing, my first worry with electric cars is what I was talking about. Come to Africa, for example. I buy my Tesla, import it to Nairobi. For me to charge the Tesla, I need electricity. And electricity in most African countries is hydro-generated. It uses water. And most of these hydro power stations, for example, the one that we have in Uganda, the Owen Falls, the one that we have in Kenya, in Kindaruma, and the rest, they use diesel. The hydro stations use diesel, not as the primary source of energy, but in the production process. So explain to me how I'm not using a diesel car, using an electric car, that I'll charge using electricity that was generated using diesel. How is that making the world clean? How is that eco-friendly? How is that green? How is that sustainable? How is that sustainable? Then we haven't even gone to the mining process and the things that happen in Congo that I don't like talking about, but that I'm going to talk about in a bit. But you look at the how reliable are electric cars. For how long are you going to use them? Then after you use them, how are we going to, what is the process of getting rid of them? Are they not more pollutants when they are not, you know? And what is the changing? You look at the infrastructure in Africa. Do we have enough stations to charge the cars? Do we even have electricity? In Nigeria, they use generators, and yet they're being told to use now. So apparently in Nigeria, they're going to be using generators to charge. In Nigeria, they're going to be using diesel generators to charge electric cars. Like, bruv, just put the diesel that is in the generator in your car and go home. I was talking about the battery recycling and production. The batteries that are used in the vehicles are more pollutants when they get old and they have to be you have to get rid of them. Then they are more pollutants than even the carbon that would have been emitted from the vehicles. That's why you look at the junkyards where the electric cars have been taken to, and it is the lithium ion batteries that are used in EVs. Their disposal of spent batteries causes more pollution, releases more carbon than driving a gas car itself, a gas that is an oil, a gas driven car. Now let us now go to the to even how cobalt is mined that is using the batteries together with the lithium ion. Look at what is happening in Congo with kids getting sick because they went, you know, it's okay, you can steal, but at least compensate the people helping you steal. So you want to steal and steal and still let the people who helped you still die. And they're using kids, and you all know this. I know you all know this. You all know how the mining process of some of this cobalt is in Congo, and how kids are dying from so many diseases in Congo, apparently because no they don't want to go into the cost of paying workers, so they have to use kids. Now when they use kids, the kids, anyway, let me show you a video of it. I don't want to talk about it as much. It's one thing that makes me really saddened, especially when I talk about DRC Congo and the things that are happening there, so that you can drive your green Tesla and talk about how
This
you're
giant
helping.
brown chasm you see here is the end result of centuries of mining in the Congo. More than 500,000 people reside in the Congolese city of Kolwezi, where it holds more cobalt than the rest of the world combined. Global electric car sales tripled in just 3 years, soaring from 4% in 2020 to 14% in 2022. Projections for 2023 indicates a staggering 14 million electric vehicles sold, showcasing a remarkable 35% year-over-year growth. And it's not just EVs. Smartphones, laptops, e-bikes dominate e-commerce, ranking in billions. In the US alone, consumers shell out $14 billion on electronic gadgets. The exponential rise in global demands for electronic goods, propelled by the rapidly growing electric vehicle market, amplifies the crisis surrounding the cobalt supply chain, impacting the lives of Congolese people who bear the brunt of hazardous mining conditions, social economic disparities, and environmental degradation. So how did we get here?
The history of the Congo is the history of the enslavement and the colonization and pillage of Africa. So the Belgians took over in 1908, and right at that period, in the southeastern corner of the country, a place called Katanga, they discovered massive mineral deposits on a scale unlike anywhere else in the world.
So I was more interested in what really happens with the kids and how they use kids as miners in Congo for them to produce the cobalt that is being used in your Tesla, that is being used in your electric car, so that you can feel good about yourself and talk about how you're not contributing to global warming and you have a less carbon footprint as compared. You know, you now feel better about yourself, because that is what this whole thing is about. I cycle to work, so I'm a better human because I don't pollute. And yet forget that as an individual, we are going to finish with this video in a bit. As an individual, your carbon emission is negligible. There is nothing that, compared to the pollution that is coming out of the big corporations, your pollution is negligible. Doesn't really change a thing. But you've been made to believe it's your responsibility, it is your fault. You're the one responsible for this. And as we go to the second biggest scam of the century, we are going to come back to. I'm trying to balance the time and the scams I have, because the scams are too many and the propagandas are so many. We've been fed with so much propaganda that I would need 2-3 shows for us to talk about all the propagandas, that the lies, the scams of the century. And this is the Diary of a Young Black King. In case you're just joining me, with me, Dimore. It comes to you every Saturday from 12 to 2 p.m. We talk about everything to do with Africa. We discuss Africa in-depthly, and we try to exchange thoughts and learn. The second biggest scam of the century, according to me, that I believe they sold the lie and made it look so true. As I said, from that character in Game of Thrones who said, when people speak too many lies, when lies are the order of the day, then even truth does not make sense anymore. And when people don't really mean what they say and they don't say what they mean, then it's hard to believe anything. Public debt is the second biggest scam of the century. You look at the public debt, you look at the debt that Kenya owes the IMF, you look at the debt that Nigeria owes the IMF, you look at the debt that Ghana owes the Bretton Woods institutions, look at the debt that everybody apparently in the world owes them something. Even the United States in itself owes whoever loans something. So it is a question of, who do we owe? When we talk about the public debt in Africa, who is it that we really owe? The IMF? No, that is just a smoke screen. Who is the IMF, and where did the IMF get the money to loan us? Who do we really owe? Who does the United States of America owe? When it talks about the US public debt. You know? Kenya's total public debt is at 9.6 trillion, with 5.1 trillion in external debt. Africa's biggest problem right now is debt. Public debt. Public debt is taking Ghana down a spiral. Ghana is going down a spiral because of public debt. They even had to go cry to the IMF. You know, so who do we really owe? Who finances the, you know, when we talk about public debt, I want us to go through it step by step, and as to why public debt is the second biggest scam of the century, and how public debt is used to keep Africa poor. Let me first talk about how public debt, before we get to why it is a scam, how public debt, which is not really public at all, because it is not public if you don't, you can't even reveal it to the people who are the ones who are going to pay it. But here is how public debt keeps Africa poor. One, they insert specific clauses that are meant to leave Africa in poverty. An example is a clause in Nigeria's debt. Nigeria has a huge debt. So there was a clause in its debt that talked about getting rid of subsidies so that they may be able to raise enough revenue to service debts. So apparently right now, the people of Nigeria are out in the streets protesting because the cost of living is high and the standards of living are low. You know, there is no money in the circulation because all the money that Nigerians get, they use it to pay public debts. That is why there is no money in Nigeria and the people are out protesting and people are dying of hunger. So the debts, they insert specific clauses in the debts that are meant to keep Africa poor. An example being that, and I explained this on my show, but in case I'm gonna repeat the explanation on how that specific clause of doing away with fuel subsidies can take down a whole economy down, like a whole African economy. Take any country, go to Senegal and do away with their fuel subsidies, and the economy is gonna go down a spiral. And they put that in the debt clauses for a reason. And here is why. First and foremost, as I explained earlier when I was talking about climate change, most electricity in Africa is generated through hydro. Electricity in Africa is hydro generated. That means, so first and foremost, subsidies is, you know, the cost of gas and oil might be high in the global market. You can blame the Ukrainian war, the Russian war if you want to use them as scapegoats, you can do that. But if the price of the gas is high in the global market, so the government helps consumers meet part of the cost for the fuel so that the cost is not going to be too high. So if the consumer is supposed to buy 1 liter of petrol, we use liters. If a consumer is supposed to buy 1 liter of petrol at 400 shillings, then the government pays 200 shillings, and now the final consumer pays 200 bob. So that is helping the final consumer carry the burden, not just leave the whole burden to them. So subsidies, once you take away subsidies, the cost of diesel, petrol goes up. And that makes the cost of power go up because diesel is used in hydro stations. So the cost of power goes up. Once the cost of power goes up, the production cost of all commodities goes up. Once the production cost of all commodities goes up, now people cannot be able to afford bread, people cannot be able to afford General Mosquito cannot be able to afford milk anymore. Now he has to drink tea without milk. And now the cost of living is high. So they do that specifically for that. They insert those clauses, and they really love that clause to do with doing away with fuel subsidies. Do away with fuel subsidies, make the cost of living unbearable, and let the people suffer. That is the first way that they use debts to destroy Africa. Before I get to why it's a scam, and a good afternoon to you, General Mosquito. And thank you for joining me. The second thing that they do is insert the fuel subsidies thing is also happening in Kenya. It was in Ghana. It was in Nigeria. I also saw it in Egypt. Egypt went for a bailout and they were told, if you want a bailout, bro, you're going to do away with fuel subsidies. You can't be helping people. You have to let people suffer so that we can give you a bailout. And Egypt had to do that. And they were given an 8 billion US dollars bailout. So they do that. They are strategic, and I always say they are strategic and targeted towards specific industries and fields that are known to be vital. Because you touch on fuel, you've touched the backbone of any African country, any country, not just African, because even when a product has been produced in the industry, it needs to be transported to the consumer. It's going to use road, and now the cost of fuel is up, so the transportation cost is going to be up, and now of course with the chain of distribution, the final burden will be transferred to the consumer. So I used to buy bread at $1, I'm now gonna buy it at $2. That is how it goes. The second thing they do is they insert high interest rates on the debts, making Africa pay almost double the amount it borrowed. And if you don't believe me, I'll read you the amount that Kenya paid last year. Last year, Kenya paid $612 billion, not million, billion, 612 billion in interest. That is not the debt. They haven't touched on the debt. That is just the interest. 612 billion in interest. I don't know how. I can't even fathom. I can't even explain the amount of development that 612 billion would do if put into work. If they put 612 billion towards building hospitals, they are building 100 plus hospitals. If they decided to build roads using the 612 billion, they're going to build 2 Thika superhighways. The best road in Kenya is apparently Thika superhighway, which costed less than that. If they put 612 billion into development, then every household in Kenya is going to get electricity. If they put that towards development, then nobody is going to pay school fees anymore. They are going to help reduce the school fees. And apparently nobody will not go to school because they don't have school fees. But now we have to spend 612 billion a year to pay on interest alone. Interest. You've not touched on the debts. And so what this means is majority of the revenue that is collected after corruption, of course, after they've stolen. So they collect revenue, they steal, then the one that is left goes towards servicing debts, leaving nothing for other sectors such as healthcare, agriculture. That is why there's no development. People are getting taxed, but there's no development because all the money is either stolen or used to pay debts. And if you ask who you owe, nobody can fully explain. When I ask who are we paying back and why, and where did they get the money to loan us? What businesses do they run? Who finances them? You're not going to get the answer, and we are going to come to that. Who are we paying the 612 billion to? The IMF? Where did the IMF get the money to loan us? What backs their currency? Because economics 101, currency is backed by gold. Currency is backed by certain minerals. You just can't print money. You need some minerals to back it up. So where did the money come from? What was it backed with? Who financed them? And who are we paying back? When we default on loans like Ghana did, who did they default on? Because IMF is just but a smokescreen, for lack of a better word. Just a puppet. There's somebody controlling the puppet. And that is the person that we owe. And that is why public debts are the biggest scam of the century. Because who do we owe, and where did they get the money to loan us? And what backs their currency? Who does the United States of America owe? In dollars, by the way. They owe somebody apparently in dollars. Dollars is supposed to be their currency, which they don't even own. It's the property of the Federal Reserve. You know, who is it that we owe? That was the second way that they use to make sure debts make Africans remain poor from debts. Thirdly, debts are used to breed and nurture corruption. I wish you saw some of the reasons they, when they borrow, they send a list on why they borrowed. So you're gonna see. I was reading Uganda's. I was going through a Ugandan document on certain loans that Museveni had approved, and there were loans on don't know how many $1 million to end gender-based violence. $200 million to increase gender inclusivity. And they love that. They throw in the word. I was saying, just throw in the word gender or climate. You're going to get a loan. Doesn't matter how flat it is, just throw the word climate. Increase climate awareness. Ask for 400 million to increase climate awareness. It's going to be given to you. Just throw in, just whatever you do, just throw in the word gender or climate. You are sure you're going to get the loans that you require. And they even use the loans, they use the public debt, the loans are used as a blackmail for the African people. Look at Uganda when it did away with the LGBTQ. What happened? They were told, "Bruh, you're not getting any more debts. Then we are not financing you anymore." Ghana the other day passed the anti-LGBTQ rule, and even the finance minister, the new finance minister, they had the old one who was fired. Now they have a new one. Went to parliament to beg them, please don't pass this law, because if you pass it, we are already in a financial crisis. If you pass it, we are going down. They are not gonna give us money anymore. And now I really doubt. I really doubt it is going to pass, because the finance minister was in parliament begging them not to pass it, because he was urging them not to pass it, and President Nana Akufo-Addo will probably not sign it, because the finance minister has advised him and told him, if you sign it, bro, we are not getting any more debts. So they even used public debt, they used the loans as a means of blackmail. You either do this or we are not going to give you money. And because you are already in a hole, you have a debt that is maturing in the next 4 months, which if you default on, then investors start running away from your country because they think your currency is going down. Now you're going to be blacklisted like Ghana was, like Egypt was. So now, because you don't want your country blacklisted by the financiers, you end up doing what you've been asked to do. You end up being a puppet yourself, because you are in a hole and you can't get out of the hole, so you dig further in. You take debts. It is only in Africa where we take debts to pay debts. To who, I don't know. To who we are paying debts, I don't know. To who we are taking, I don't know, because don't tell me about the IMF and the Bretton Woods institutions and the African Development Bank and all the other names, because they're just but smoke screens. And so, thirdly, I was explaining how debts are taking down Africa. They are used as tools of blackmail. You either do this or we are gonna do this. You either do this or we are gonna do this. That is the narrative that sells. You either do this or we are not gonna give you loans. You either do this or we are gonna cut on your donations. That is why Kenya has been getting a lot of donations lately. We've noticed. We had the golden what was the name of this bond that was maturing the other day? Eurobond. We had the Eurobond maturing. Ruto did not even have to beg. He was bailed out instantly. Why? Because he's doing whatever he's being told to do. He's up there talking about climate change. He's out there doing all the work that he's being told to do, and he's getting rewarded for it. Donations after donations after donations. You're having so many donations. That is why the Kenya shillings is doing well, because the IMF bailed us out of the Eurobond, and the Kenyan shilling became stronger than it was. And you go on and on and on. But that is how public debt is used to keep Africa on the ropes. I was saying how it is also used to breed corruption, because they really don't care how the money is going to be used. They're just going to give out the money anyway, and the leaders are not going to care how the money is going to be used. They're not the ones who are going to pay. Some of the debts has to be paid in the next 20 years. Why would they care? And that is why every African president is a billionaire. Name me one African president who's not a billionaire, and I'll move there. You go to Sierra Leone, you go to Senegal, you go to Gambia, you go to South Africa. Doesn't matter how long they've been in power, they'll be billionaires in a few. And you look at their salary and their net worth, it doesn't make sense. It's the grants, it's the loans. They use it for personal benefits, and the financiers don't really care, because they don't even want the money to help you. They just want you to pay back the debt. And public debts are the second scam of the century, because who do we really owe the money? Where did the money come from? I don't want to even answer. I want you to ask yourself that. Who do we owe? And we talk about Kenya paid 612 billion in terms of interest last year. Who did they pay it to? And where did the money to loan Kenya in the first place come from? Africa's total debt, according to African Development Bank, is at $1.8 trillion. $1.8 trillion is the total debt. And by the way, they say it is the lowest in the world. I don't know how true that is. They say Africa's debt is the lowest in the world. But still, who do we owe 1.8 trillion? Let whoever we owe 1.8 trillion, I don't know who we owe. Where did the money come from? What businesses do they run? Did they just print money and give it to us? Money that had no value, because for money to have value, it has to be backed by something. That is why if you look at a note, it will have the words legal tender. This is a legal tender. It is, let me see if I have a Kenyan note and look at the words that are in it. Yeah, I have one. So this is $2. This is 200 shillings. It is $2. Might be less than $2, but it was $2 a few years ago. And if you look at it, it is written legal tender for 200 shillings. It is a legal tender. It has to be backed by something for it to yeah, it is right there. Legal tender for 200 shillings. This is $2. It has to be backed by something for it to be worth. Otherwise, it is just a piece of paper. For it to be a legal tender of payment, for it to be an acceptable means of payment, that means it must represent a value of something. But do they just give us worthless paper and then we pay them back with valuable currency? Do they just print worthless paper that doesn't have any backing, that doesn't have any value, give it to us? Then us, because our currency is valuable, it is backed, it is a legal tender backed by something, we give it back to them. Do they do that? Because I think they do. I'm beginning to think they do. I actually think they do. I think they just print papers and give them to us and we pay them back with our minerals. Because where does the 1.8 trillion, Africa owes 1.8 trillion in public debt. Where did the money come from in the first place for it to be loaned to us? Germany alone has a debt of 2.9 trillion. That is more than Africa's debt. That is why I said allegedly Africa's debt is the lowest in the world with the 1.8 trillion. So do we owe? Is public debt has to be the scam of the century, and nobody questions this. The debt was given in dollars, but even the United States owes. What do they owe themselves? And where did the money come from? What is it backed with? And it is a big problem. Let me put into perspective to you how much public debt affects African countries. And I'm gonna use Kenya because I'm from Kenya. Kenya collects 2.1 trillion Kenya shillings every year. That is about 14.44 billion US dollars every year in terms of revenue. So it collects about 14.44 billion US dollars. In this, about 990 billion Kenya shillings is used to service interest in loans, with the loans untouched. So out of the 2.1 trillion, 990 billion are used to service debt. The debts are untouched. That is the interest. That is about 45% of the total revenue collected is used to pay interest. So to put this into further perspective, out of every $100 Kenya collects, $80 goes in towards debt servicing. That leaves $20 towards development. So for this $2 that if Ruto comes and picks these $2 from me, then 180 in this is going to go towards 160. That is $1.60 goes towards debt servicing. That leaves only 40 cents, 40 shillings towards development. Haven't finished. $40 goes towards recurrent expenditure. So I had $20 remaining, but $40 goes towards recurrent expenditure. So right now I have negative $20. $40 goes towards administration cost. So I now have negative $60. So for every $100 Kenya collects, it needs to borrow 60. Not my words, Jimmy Wanjigi's words. So for every $100 we collect, we have to borrow 60. That is why I'm saying we are in a hole that to get out of that hole, we need to dig further. And we are paying debts to I don't know who. I figured out they print papers and give it to us. Then we pay back with our minerals. They just print worthless paper because, as I said, finances 101, a currency that is not backed by anything is just a piece of paper. A currency has to be backed by something. It is a legal tender. It has to represent some value. It has to represent some value. So if I print a worthless piece of paper, give it to you, then I take your minerals, then I'm the one who's using you. You're getting worthless paper in exchange of your worthy minerals. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the second scam of the century. Public debts. We pay loans to people we don't know. We borrow from I don't know who. And we borrow to pay debts. We have debts to a point that we borrow to pay debts. And now we have to borrow again to pay the debt that we took to pay the debt. That is public debt. The biggest scam, the second biggest scam of the 21st century. The third scam for me is African integration, African unity. That is the biggest scam that was sold to the African people. Dates back to 1961 during the Monrovia Conference, and the likes of Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah and Biya, the president of Central African Republic, and called for the unity of Africans, asked Africans to unite, asked Africans to have a common army, asked Africans to have a common currency, asked Africans to have a common capital, to have a common government. Said they can have a weaker government. The Central African Republic was okay with having a weaker government. I mean, let every African country have its own president, but let us have a common administrative body. At least let us have a common administrative body. And he said, I don't care. Put the capital in Dakar. Put the capital wherever you want. But let us just have a common administrative body. But at that time, so his name was David Dacko. It was in 1960. Before the second president, his name was Jean Bedel Bokassa, took power in 1966. After they did Dacko what they do to every African leader who looks like they have a vision. So David Dacko said, you can put the capital in wherever you want, put it in Addis Ababa, put it in Arusha, put it in Dakar, but he actually suggested Dakar. But at that time, the colonial project kicked off. When they were suggesting that Africa unite, the colonizers were not happy. At that time, Kenya had not gained independence. Many countries were yet to gain independence. A few countries had, including Ghana, Central African Republic, and some few other countries, but some were still under colonial rule. And so the division started right there and then. As some leaders were meeting in Monrovia, another group met in Casablanca. So the Casablanca group, I'm not sure if it was the Casablanca group or the Monrovia. One of them was being led by the 10 prince of Ethiopia. His name was Haile Selassie. There was the likes of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, whom they built a statue for the other week in Addis Ababa. There was the likes of, they met somewhere else. As these ones were meeting talking about African unity, these other ones met somewhere else to talk about African unity too. And it was leaders from the same continent talking about African unity in different places. The irony in it. We're talking about unity, but we cannot even unite for a meeting. And so one group, the Monrovian group and the Casablanca group, one group that was being led by the likes of Thomas Sankara. No, Thomas Sankara was not there. It was Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Emery Lumumba and David Dako and the then president. That group was calling for immediate unification of Africa. They said Africa needs to unite and unite right now. Because if we do not, they are going to come back. But the other group that met, led by Haile Selassie and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere and the rest, were of a different narrative. And so they said, it is true Africa needs to unite, but we are not in a hurry, brothers, are we? We can unite, but gradually. Why? What is the hurry for? And the second time they met in Addis Ababa. And this time they met all of them. It was in 1961. So both the Casablanca and the Monrovian group was in Addis Ababa. And once again, David Dako spoke and called for Africans to unite. And he said, if we do not unite, Central African Republic is too small. The French people will be back. And Kwame Nkrumah spoke and said, we need to have a common military. He said, the independence of Ghana is the independence of Africa. Because the independence of Ghana without the independence of Africa is useless. Patrice Lumumba spoke and said, we need to have a common capital somewhere. Make it Addis Ababa. Make it in... But most of them were suggesting Central African Republic, that is in the capital city of Central African Republic. That is in Bangui, formerly Bangu. But do you know what came out of the meeting? The OAU, the Organization of African Union. After deliberations, all they came up with was the OAU. No common government, no common currency, no common capital, but the OAU. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the third scam of the century. African unity in its current infrastructure. So long story short, the OAU came to later be the AU in 2001, if I'm not wrong. Had its capital in Addis Ababa, and it is allegedly the body that is supposed to deal with African unity, to unite Africans as a continent, even have its own bank, the African Development Bank. It even has its peacekeepers, the AU peacekeepers, they are there. But I can't name one mission that the AU peacekeepers went to. There's a whole humanitarian crisis going on in DRC. Why is the AU? I don't know. People are getting killed in Tigray right now in Ethiopia. 50 people were killed last week by Ethiopian armed defense forces. 50 civilians. Maybe when I say people, you think they were fighting. 50 civilians were killed. Where was the AU? I don't know. 287 children were abducted yesterday in Nigeria. 50 were abducted in Mozambique. Where was the AU? I really don't know. People are dying of hunger in Nigeria right now. Even the aid is getting stolen, by the way. Nigeria is the only country that steals even aid. Shout out to the people of Nigeria. Why is the AU? I don't know. The body that is supposed to unite Africans. But then you remember that he who pays the piper calls the tune. And you ask, who finances the AU? Who finances the African Union? Who finances IGAD? Who finances all those puppet bodies that we have in Africa? Call them ECOWAS, IGAD, COMESA, EAC. Who finances them? Who finances the African Development Bank? Let me tell you a story of I was taking I studied investigative journalism as a unit, and my lecturer always told me whenever you are investigating a case, the first thing that you look at is motive. And if you know the motive, then you are gonna know who did it. If somebody was killed, the first question you should ask yourself is, who would have wanted this person killed? And once you have identified the motive, you're going to identify who did it. So who is financing these puppet corporations we have? Who is financing the AU? Who's financing the African Development Bank? Who's financing ECOWAS? Who's financing IGAD? What is their motive? Why are they financing them? And once you know that, then you're going to know why Africa is in the state it is. Who's financing the likes of UNICEF? Who's financing the likes of all those bodies we see? Where do they get their finances from? Because most of the finances are external. And let me look at the propaganda they have. Let me ask, who finances AU? I'm going to look at that right now and see what they're going to tell me. So apparently, Google says the UN and EU. Oh, let me see who finances it. And I'm not even lying. This is from the AU's official website. They have a docket named financing, and it says the AU is currently not financed in a predictable, sustainable, equitable, or accountable manner. It is heavily dependent on donor funding. That is in the facts section. That is the QA section of the AU website. I'm reading it from there. It says the AU is currently not financed in a predictable, sustainable, equitable, or accountable manner. It is heavily dependent on donor funding to run its program and operations. This is further compounded by the fact that more than 40% of member states do not pay their yearly contribution. So apparently more than 40% of states do not pay their yearly contributions to the AU. This is in the AU's official website on how they get their funding, and it says more than 40% of countries do not pay their yearly contribution. Further, member states have limited involvement in processing and setting the AU's budget, and therefore AU has to depend on donor funding to run its programs and operations. And don't you forget that he who pays the piper calls the tune. Doesn't matter how the tune is gonna be. The piper doesn't have to love the tune, but who pays him has to get his tune played. And the donors fund the AU, and the donors are external, and the donors are not African, and AU is supposed to be the one in charge of African unity. Shout out to the AU. This is the same case with IGAD, the same case with ECOWAS, the same case with every puppet African body, because they are all puppets. You look at the African Development Bank, let us ask, who finances the African Development Bank? Let us see the propaganda. Who finances the ADB? So apparently, African Development Bank partners with international development agencies and institutions in the private sector and other emerging development partners. Those are the partners of the African Development Bank. So institutions that we do not finance are the ones that are responsible for our unity as Africans, and you expect us to be united. Now, when we have more than 40% of African countries not paying their monthly contributions to the AU, and rightly so, because I wouldn't pay to the AU too if I was a president, because why would I pay to a body that doesn't help me? Therefore, AU now has to depend on more than 90% foreign funding, and you still expect it to fight for Africans when we do not even fund it. So, ladies and gentlemen, African unity, African integration in its current state is the third biggest scam of the century. The biggest lie, the biggest propaganda you're ever gonna hear. Doesn't matter how many meetings the AU calls, how many meetings the ECOWAS calls, how many meetings IGAD calls, how many meetings the EAC calls, how many meetings COMESA calls. It doesn't represent African unity in any way. If it did, it would be African financed. It would be financed by Africans. There's no way an externally financed organization will cater for the needs of Africa. I do not believe it. I will never believe it. I will never believe it. That is why you can't name a single thing the African Union, the AU, has done. You can't mention a single war the AU peacekeepers went and mediated. And we can say there was a war here, but right now there is not. And you ask, why is there no fighting in Ethiopia anymore? And somebody's gonna tell you the AU peacekeepers came here and they stopped the war. You will never hear of that. And if you ever hear of that, I don't know, I'm gonna stop doing this show. African integration, African unity in the current infrastructure, in the current setting is the scam. It is never going to happen. Because the bodies that are supposed to make it happen are financed by people who do not want it to happen. So they are manipulated from within. That is why the biggest thing that the ECOWAS has done this year is threatened, not this year, last year. The biggest thing that I can remember ECOWAS doing, ECOWAS is the economic states of West African countries. It is the uniting body in West Africa. The only thing I can remember them doing was threatening Burkina Faso. Shout out to them. I remember them for that. Telling Burkina Faso, if you do not go back to the government, we are going to come with our defense forces and we are gonna, that is the biggest achievement of ECOWAS in recent times. Because where is ECOWAS when kids are getting kidnapped in Nigeria? Where was ECOWAS when 287 kids were kidnapped yesterday? Where was ECOWAS? Where was the AU? Where was IGAD? Where was all those bodies you call? They can't even protect kids in schools. Where was the AU? Where was the African Development Bank when Ghana was going down? Because Ghana was going down. When it defaulted on its loan, it was going down. Nobody wanted to lend Ghana anymore. Its currency was going down. Where was the African Development Bank? I don't know. But apparently it is supposed to be our development bank. Show me projects that African Development Bank has developed, as its name suggests. Where are the projects from the African Development Bank? What has it financed? What countries has it helped out of economic crisis? And yet we sit here and talk about African unity. African unity in the current infrastructure is but a scam. It's never going to happen. The people financing the institutions are the people who do not want it to happen. So we are being delusional. Not just delusional, but very delusional when we talk about African unity in the current infrastructure. Is there a single African financed institution? A single one that is purely African financed? I don't know who finances the EU, but I know it is the EU. Who buys guns for the AU peacekeepers? If they have guns at all. I've never seen them fighting, man. Not even hating. I've never seen AU peacekeepers fighting. But if they do, shout out to them. I have nothing against AU peacekeepers. If they are there, I know there are people who probably misinformed, just trying to fight for Africa. Let me see the wars that AU peacekeepers have fought. I'm not seeing any. Oh, they were there in Somalia, together with the United Nations peacekeepers. Oh, they are there. Who finances them? Who buys them guns? The question. Because it's not Africa. Who dictates where they are going to fight? Because it's not Tinubu. Tinubu is the chairman of ECOWAS. He can't even command the ECOWAS forces to go and rescue the kids who are kidnapped. He is the chairman of ECOWAS, but he cannot even command them to go and rescue school kids. Who says where the wars are gonna? Who says what wars it is gonna go to? You know, and many other questions. And the last scam of the century, not really the last, it is just because the time is almost up and HR the Messenger is coming up in a bit with his show and he has a guest today, is democracy in Africa. Democracy in Africa as it is the fourth biggest scam of the century after African integration. Elections. We have elections every year. Senegal is having its election this year, so it's South Africa. So is several countries are having elections this year. One is South Africa, one is Senegal. Ghana will be having its election either this year or next year. Let me see which other countries are having elections. So those ones were off head. I'm sure there are other countries. So Mauritania is going to have its election. Rwanda is going to have its election. It's funny because even Rwanda is going to have its election eventually. Mozambique is having election. Tunisia is going to have election. Somali is going to have election. It's called Somaliland. Mozambique is going to have election. Tunisia. Guinea-Bissau is going to have elections. Namibia is going to have elections. Ghana will have elections this year in December. President Nana is leaving power after messing up the economy. South Sudan is going to have elections. Mauritius is going to have elections. So will Algeria. And we have elections every year, but nothing really changes. So explain to me why. Those how many elections have I mentioned? About 10. Every year we have elections in Africa. And yet we get the same politicians, the same corrupt names over and over, and nothing changes. Democracy is supposed to be a government for the people, by the people. Are the people electing a government by themselves that is corrupt, as they are, because they are corrupt and corrupt to the core? Look at Nigeria. Look at South Sudan. Look at Rwanda. Democracy as it is, democracy in the current infrastructure in Africa is but a scam. Presidential elections especially. That is why we have leaders who have been in power for the last 30 years. Museveni, I was born when Museveni was a president. He's still there. I'm almost marrying, but the president is still the same that I married when I was born. Rwanda has never seen another president. Democracy in Africa. You mean to tell me that African people elect the same leaders who oppressed? I mean, he oppresses us for 15 years, then we elect him again for 20, then again for 25, then again for 30. I mean, I know African people are ignorant. They have been kept ignorant by so many things. But trust me, none of them is going to vote for a leader who's been there 15 years and done nothing. We have the president of Equatorial Guinea, Nguesso. His name is Nguesso, if I'm not wrong. No, his name is Nguema Basogo. He's been in power for 43 years. 43 years. Equatorial Guinea has never seen any other president for 43 years. Teodoro Nguema Basogo has been in power since. Cameroon's Paul Biya has been in power for 40 years. 40 years. Sassou Nguesso, who I was talking about in DRC, has been in power for 38 years. He won recently. Uganda's one very own Yoweri Museveni has been in power for 36 years. King Mswati, at least he's a king, has ruled Eswatini for 36 years, if I'm not wrong. Eritrea has had one president for 29 years, Isaias Afwerki. He's ruled since 1993. Do you want to tell me the people go back, elect the same people again and again and again, despite the fact that nothing changes? I mean, it would be something if Nguema Basogo of Equatorial Guinea was president for 43 years and Equatorial Guinea was doing good. Nobody would really care. I mean, you can stay there, but at least the country is rich and the people are living well and there's, you know. But you mean to tell me the people of Equatorial Guinea vote for Basogo year in, year out? They die, their kids vote for Basogo year in, year out. Without nothing changes in Equatorial Guinea, it is still poor. And by the way, he's gonna run for his 6th term. I'm not even making this up. He's going to run for his 6th term, which will last 7 years. And he has been in power for 43 years right now. But he's gonna run for the 6th term. And that will see him in power for 50 years. Shout out to him. And that is the case in go to Cameroon with Paul Biya. It would be one thing if Paul Biya had been in power for 40 years and the country was developed. But now he's been in power for 40 years, nothing changes. Cameroon is still poor. People are still fighting over Anglophonic and Francophonic basis. You speak English, I speak French. I'm gonna fight you. That is how backward Cameroon is. 40 years in Paul Biya's presidency. And that is why I believe, and you can never convince me otherwise, democracy as we know it in Africa is a scam. We do not have presidential elections. What we have is presidential selections. They select. No, they don't select, they handpick. Selecting is general. Handpicking is looking for a specific person with specific characteristics that will suit your agenda, picking them up, putting them in power. That is what happens. Because as Keith said, and I agree, it is a mathematical absurdity that out of the 54 countries, 55 if you believe Sahrawi is a state, out of the 55 countries we have in Africa, all of the leaders do not care. It is a mathematical absurdity that we can have 55 corrupt individuals. It is mathematically impossible. It is not, the probability is zero. I mean, it is okay, we can have 30 corrupt leaders. That is mathematically possible. The probability makes sense. We can have 40 corrupt leaders. It makes sense. But you cannot have 55 corrupt leaders by coincidence. It can't happen. You can't have 55 leaders who do not care. It can't happen. It is a mathematical absurdity. It is improbable. The probability is not there. Unless somebody is handpicking the corrupt leaders, you can't have 55 kids and they are all crooks. Unless, I don't know, unless you're from, I don't know, you can't. One of two of them are going to be nice. They're going to be good. That is mathematics. That is probability. You can't throw a coin up 55 times and you get heads all the time. Can't happen. So how do we have 55 corrupt leaders? How do we have 54? I'm not going to judge Sahrawi, which is fighting for its independence against Morocco. So how do we have 54 corrupt leaders? How do we have 54 crooks? How do we have 54 leaders who do not care? Is that by coincidence? Nah. It is not by coincidence. It is handpicking. They look for certain characteristics. And I agree with somebody who said it is not that power corrupts individuals. It is that power has the ability to attract corrupt individuals, corruptible minds. It is not the power that corrupts the people. The only thing that power has is the ability to attract corruptible minds. And that is how, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is poor. Because we have 55 corruptible minds who cannot stand up for anything. And I know Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, and all the other great leaders, some alive, some dead, turn on their graves when they see the state of Africa. The likes of Du Bois, the likes of... They do not believe. Do not believe what happened. The likes of Dedan Kimathi from Kenya, who fought for independence. The likes of all those great leaders, they do not believe what happened. Because what we have is a continent that is so rich yet so poor. Have people dying in Congo of hunger while working in gold mines. Do you get the irony in that? That somebody died of hunger while working in a gold mine. In a world that currency is allegedly backed by gold. You know how rich those people should be? But they are not. They are suffering. And those, ladies and gentlemen, are the scams of the century. I did not exhaust them because time did not allow me. The first scam of the century was climate change, carbon footprint, and the whole debate about you need to offset your carbon footprint. You are being lied to. You don't have a carbon footprint to offset. The term carbon footprint was popularized by BP, British Petroleum Corporation, because they wanted to have you responsible for the they wanted you to feel guilt. They wanted you to take responsibility for the emissions. And now you are out there feeling guilty. You are out there trying to emit, to offset your carbon emission, which doesn't exist. It is negligible. That was the first and the biggest scam of the century. Climate change. The second biggest scam of the century, ladies and gentlemen, was public debt. Who do you owe? Africa owes 1.8 trillion US dollars. To who? To who? Who do they owe? Where did the money come from? Did the corporations just print worthless paper, gave it to Africans, and now Africans are paying back valuable currency? And I showed you a Kenyan currency, a $2, it's a 200 Kenyan shilling, a 200 Kenya shillings. So this is an equivalent of $2. And if you look at it, it is written a legal tender for 200 shillings. This is a legal tender. And therefore, what that means is this money represents some value somewhere. It is backed by something. It represents some value. The money they give us, what value does it represent? What is it backed with? Because the money we pay them back with is valuable money. It is valuable minerals. Do they just print worthless currency and give it to us and we have to pay them? Who do we owe? When we talk about Africa owing 1.8 trillion in terms of money, in terms of debts, who is it that we really owe? The IMF? The IMF is just but a smokescreen. Who finances the IMF? Where did the money come from? Where did the 1.8 trillion come from? You have to, the third scam of the century, ladies and gentlemen, was African unity and African integration in its current states. Because who is supposed to be responsible of African unity? The African Union. Where did the African Union come from? Who finances the African Union? Who finances the African Development Bank? Who finances ECOWAS? Who finances IGAD? Who finances the EAC? They themselves have said in their website that they depend on donor funds. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. So who pays the piper and who calls the tune? What is that one thing the AU has done for Africa? African unity in its current state is the third biggest scam of the century in the current infrastructure. That was the third biggest scam of the century. The fourth scam of the century, ladies and gentlemen, was democracy in Africa in its current state. And I said it is a mathematical improbability for us to have 55 corrupt leaders. 54 if you do not believe Sahrawi is a state. We cannot have 54 corrupt leaders. It is a mathematical absurdity. It's a mathematical improbability. It can't happen. 50 maybe, 45 maybe, 40 maybe, but 100% of the leaders being... It can't happen. So those are the four scams of the century that I had time to talk about today. I'm out of time. HR the Messenger is coming up in a bit. And a big shout out to Jiba Jaba who's joined me late. And I'm glad you joined, Jiba Jaba. I was almost wondering where you are today. And he says, thanks for the recap. I'll cue the replay. And he said, boy, such a colorful piece of toilet paper. You're playing with my $2, Jiba Jaba. This is enough for lunch. This is my lunch money right there. And it is such a colorful piece of toilet paper that we were handed and we don't know what it is backed by. So that was all I had today. Thank you for joining me. For all of those who are with me, those of you who are watching and did not comment, thank you for having joined me. That was on the Black Hot Fire Network YouTube page, Facebook page, and the Kid News YouTube page. Those of you who are with me on the radio station, on the network, a big thank you for joining me. Thank you for creating time to come and listen to my rantings. I know I rant a lot, but thank you for creating time to listen to me. All of those who are gonna watch this later, thank you for also watching and keeping it Black Hot Fire Network. And have a good day, have a good day to Jiba Jaba, and peace to you. I hope you enjoy your weekend. It's a cold weekend in Nairobi. I'm about to go to the countryside to say hi to my grandmother somewhere in the Rift Valley and just chill in the countryside. It is too cold in the city for me, and I don't have anybody around, so I'll just go to the countryside. It is a 5 hours drive to my village, so I'll just go and chill there. So thank you for joining me. I hope to see you on Monday on the Black Hot Fire News Update as from 7 to 7:30, and I hope to see you next Saturday on the Diary of a Young Black King. Make sure to join me, and we're gonna be talking about more interesting conversations. So I hope you have an amazing weekend. It's always a pleasure having you, ladies and gentlemen. Peace.